Thank you all for joining this important meeting, and it's great to see some of the familiar faces and some new faces to discuss what's going on in the region and what can be done to improve the situation. Let me first start off by saying that although I have been following the security situation on the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia since the 1980s, the current situation is the worst, the most dangerous that I have ever seen. And I am gravely worried, and I use today's opportunity mainly to share my concerns and reasons for my concerns. And I hope to get away from the meeting with some hopes from you for future prospects for peace. So let me share a PowerPoint that I have prepared. And my talk will be basically about the reasons why I think the current situation is the most dangerous that I have ever seen since the 1980s. And the main reason is that the major state parties to the Korean War are pursuing first strike doctrines and capabilities. And that they are doing so because they have been engaged in the Korean War for over 70 years and have been engaged in an escalating arms race. And so we need to think about ways to de-escalate and find room for diplomacy and peace. So what do I mean by the rise of first strike doctrines? Well, take a look at what North Korea has been doing for the past year or two. North Korea has been developing nuclear and missile capabilities at least since the 1990s. But until last year, its nuclear doctrine was a no first use. It will use its nuclear weapons in retaliation. But in September 2022, North Korean People's Assembly adopted a law that they call On Nuclear Forces Policy that lays out conditions under which they will use nuclear weapons. And the conditions include not just the conditions of a nuclear attack on North Korea, but non-nuclear attacks. And so if you look at condition number 2, non-nuclear attack against national leadership, or if non-nuclear attack is deemed imminent, then North Korea can use nuclear weapons. So this is a clear first nuclear strike doctrine. And if you can go down the list when you have time, but North Koreans are basically saying in this law that they will use nuclear weapons in a first strike if they deem it necessary. So now the question is whether the North Koreans have the capability to actually pull it off. And North Korea had been developing deterrence capability, mainly in the form of ICBM and nuclear warheads that could be delivered by ICBM. And they certainly have ICBM capabilities, but they are now developing solid fuel engines and possibly multiple warhead rockets that could be useful for a first strike against the US continent. Not only that, they are also developing intermediate range missiles that could be used in a first strike against targets in Japan, Guam, or Alaska. And finally, North Koreans are developing short-range missiles that could deliver tactical nuclear warheads against targets anywhere in South Korea. So not only do North Koreans have the strategic nuclear warheads, but they also have delivery capabilities that could deliver the nuclear warheads to the continental US, targets in the Pacific, and South Korea. They have been demonstrating their capabilities in various tests in recent years. And so they could now launch their missiles from, and not only anywhere on the land, but also under the sea or under the lake. And they also have solid fuels that could be used to launch missiles on warning. And so these are very useful capabilities to use for first strike. And they also have developed warheads that could maneuver to evade missile defense systems, and they could also be very useful in a first strike. And so North Korea has a first strike doctrine and first strike capabilities, and they are continuing to enhance their first strike capabilities. So the question is, why are they doing this? And a lot of the answers can be found in the second bullet point in this slide. And if you look under capabilities, you see the military spending by South Korea and North Korea, very conveniently provided by the US State Department. And according to its report, South Korea spent $44 billion on its military, whereas North Korea spent $4.3 billion, 1/10 of South Korea's military spending. Furthermore, $4.3 billion represents 26.4% of GDP, and therefore North Korea's GDP would be approximately four times its military spending, and 4.3 plus times 4 is about $17 billion. And so if you compare $17 billion with South Korea's defense spending, you can see that it's not even half of South Korea's military spending. In other words, even if North Korea allocates all of its economic activities to the military, it cannot possibly imagine to match South Korea's military capability. And therefore, they are turning to asymmetric capabilities like missiles and nuclear capabilities. And so the structural asymmetry in the security condition is creating an incentive for North Korea to develop missiles and nuclear warheads. And furthermore, South Korea is developing capabilities that would neutralize North Korean missiles and nuclear missiles. And furthermore, especially the Yoon government is developing doctrines and capabilities that would be used for what they call decapacitation capabilities for taking out the leadership of North Korea. And so South Korea is pursuing capabilities that would take out North Korea's missile capabilities before they could be launched. That's part of three-axis system. And South Korea is also developing capabilities that would knock out missiles in flight. That's part of the three-axis system. And the last component, the last X of the three-axis system is the decapitation capabilities. And as if these were not enough, South Korean government and think tanks are talking about what they call plus alpha, that actually implies a regime change. And so South Korean government is pursuing the capabilities for regime change. Now, quickly moving on to the US. The US has been implementing its first strike doctrines since November 30, 1950. I could pinpoint the date because President Truman kindly came out, made a public announcement on that date that he would use atom bombs, as they were called it back then, if necessary. And the US governments have been maintaining that posture ever since, under the name of the extended deterrence. And now the extended deterrence has an added component of what they call tailored deterrence. And so the deterrence strategy is tailored to the conditions in the Korean Peninsula. And in the case of North Korea, the purpose of the tailored deterrence is specifically the end of that regime, as a nuclear posture review of 22 explicitly stated. So the US has all these capabilities that are designed to bring about the end of that regime. Now, Japan. The previous Abe government has adopted security laws that made the peace constitution an empty vessel. And so Japan now has defense forces that could be used in an international arena. And Japan certainly has the capabilities. But the Kishida government is using this opportunity further to really develop the capability to strike the enemy first before Japan could be hit by the enemy. And so this capability used to be called the enemy-based strike capability under the Abe administration, but now it's given a more generic name, counter-strike capability. But the essence is the same. It's the ability for Japan to strike the enemy before the enemy strikes Japan. And to pursue this capability, Japan is increasing its military spending, and it has an ambitious plan to really increase the spending by 2027. And one big chunk of the spending will be spent on purchasing 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles from the US. And so Japan will be the second country that would be able to import the Tomahawk missiles from the US. And as you probably are aware, Tomahawk cruise missiles were the weapons of choice when the US military initiated attacks on Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and other places since the 1990s. These are very effective weapons for a first strike. And Kishida government is portraying this as a defensive capability, but because the cruise missile is so slow, it has to be launched way before, for example, North Korea launches its ballistic missile. And so Japan will have to fire first before North Korea even touches the button. So Japan has adopted counter-strike capability as a strategic goal, and it's actually pursuing the capability to implement this. And recently, Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary, Masuno, came out and to North Korea's military as a serious and imminent threat. And if you recall, the North law stated that if it deems that imminent attack is imminent, that it could use its nuclear weapons. And here, the Japanese official is already designating North Korea as an imminent threat, implying that the Japanese government could exercise its counter-strike capability. So all of these state parties to the war are pursuing first strike doctrine, say, capabilities in Northeast Asia, and that's really making the situation volatile. And so the question is why? And the answer is that they are all fighting the Korean War ever since 1950. And the war has never ended. And these countries have been just continuing to engage in preparation for a war, preparation for a victory. And their preparations are raising the level of insecurity to ever higher level. And so now we are really reaching a dangerous stage. And that can be seen in the military exercises this March. And so the US and South Korean militaries studied the Freedom Shield exercise involving US bombers flying in from the continental US all the way to the Korean Peninsula and simulating dropping bombs, including atomic bombs. And so this was a simulated military exercise of first strike. And the North Koreans simulating their first strike doctrines here, this time, for the first time in history. And so before the military exercise was studied, North Korea studied their military exercise. And so 6 short-range ballistic missiles were test-fired on March 9th, before the South Korean US alliance studied its exercise. And before the B-1B bombers were flowing from the US continent, North Korea fired an ICBM, Hwang 17. Not into the US this time. It was a test fire, but nevertheless, the North Koreans tested an ICBM that could have been used against the US continent target in the US. So the North Koreans were clearly showing that they have a first strike doctrine, and they are testing these doctrines with these exercises, just as the US and South Korean alliance was testing their first strike doctrines in these exercises. And the second phase of this exercise was the Sooyoung exercise. And this was amphibious, this is still ongoing. And so this is an amphibious landing exercise. And the Marines are not going to land in Tokyo Bay. They are practicing a landing exercise for somewhere in North Korea. So this is another form of attack exercise. And North Korea countered this with their first strike doctrines. So just before the Sooyoung exercise began, North Korean military test fired short-range missile KN-23 and other missiles. And the aircraft carrier Nimitz just came to Korea as part of this exercise. And just before this carrier entered the Korean waters, North Koreans pulled off another round of exercises that would be effective against aircraft carriers. So Hail-1, that was first shown in this exercise, is an underwater cruise missile that could maneuver underwater miles and miles for over 59 hours and detonate just before port. And so North Koreans were clearly demonstrating that they now have this capability and that they would use it before U.S. Carriers and other warships enter Korea. Just as the U.S. and South Korea were practicing their first strike doctrines. And I also note that on March 22nd and 23rd, UK also participated in this exercise. And so this is the first time the UK forces participated in the binational exercise. But this is another interesting development to watch. And this is the exercises in action. And I'm not going to go over the details, but move on to the next, just to highlight that the Korean War is also a European war. Especially since we have some European friends participating in this webinar, I want to remind all of you that European states participated in the active phase of the war from 1950 and 1953, and that they remain involved in the war after 1953 as members of the UNC headquarters. And they also remain involved in the war as members of the UNC. We are that's based in Japan. And this is particularly important to keep it in mind because UNC REAR has 7 bases that it could use in Japan with just a notification to the Japanese government. They do not have to get an approval from the Japanese government to use these bases. And it's not just the US, but also European and other governments that are part of this agreement. And the 7 bases are in this map. And interestingly, France and UK, as well as Australia, have been using this agreement first to monitor UN sanctions against North Korea. And so these countries sent their ships to the region and make a port call in one of these bases in Japan, and then move on to the area around the peninsula. But on their way home, they participate in exercises with the US, so-called freedom of navigation operations. And they also participate in multilateral exercises like Jeanne d'Arc 21 and Pacific Vanguard, with the big power in the Asia continent in mind and in sight. So this is precisely the mechanism by which a conflict in Korea could bring in not only Japan and the US, but also European countries. And NATO has actually been active in getting involved in the security affairs of the Asia Pacific. And I adopted a strategic concept last year that designated China as a challenge to NATO's interest, security, and values. So, given all of this, I am deeply worried that any accident or mistake can really trigger a major catastrophic conflict, just like a tiny mistake triggered World War I. And so I compare the current situation to just the days before World War I. But I think there still is a hope. And one important point is North Korea obviously, Kim Jong-un made this statement that, quote, we can never give up the nuclear weapons. And so he maintains this aggressive posture. But in the same speech, he made an important statement that's missed by a lot of observers around the world. And the important, and I think that this was perhaps the message that he wanted to convey to the outside world, is this, and I quote, if our nuclear policy is to be changed now, the world has to be changed. And so should the political and military environment on the Korean Peninsula. In other words, Kim Jong-un is implying if the military conditions on the Korean Peninsula changes, then North Korea's nuclear policies could also change. Of course, his words would have to be tested, but I think he's at least leaving the window of diplomacy open, and he's at least leaving the possibility of diplomacy open that I think needs to be explored. And we now have more than 3-4 decades of experiences with the North Korean diplomacy. And diplomacy has not produced a peace or denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But we certainly know that when there's a no diplomacy, when there's a no negotiation, things got pretty nasty. But when there was a diplomacy, when there was a engagement, North Koreans reciprocated. And so during the period of or periods of negotiations, North Koreans did not engage in the military provocations or missile or nuclear test. And I think that record need to be kept in mind as we think about what we can do. And finally, I think it's important that the U.S. House of Representatives has a bill called the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act, introduced by, I guess, about 20 representatives. And the same bill did not survive last Congress, but it was introduced again this year. And so there is at least some interest in the House of Representatives for bringing the war to an end and studying a peace negotiation. And I think that gives us some hope. And of course, there are many active civil society organizations that have been campaigning for the end of the war. And so I think there still is hope, and I think there is really a room for the diplomacy to turn things around. Thank you.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Sooyoung from Korea Peace Appeal, and thank you for joining us today. I'm happy to be with you. I will share my screen with you, so please wait a minute. Yeah, today I would like to share with you our campaign activities and plans for this year. So yeah, earlier we heard a presentation by Professor Jae-Jung Suh, and as he said, the military tension is growing more than ever, and the recent situation is not hopeful. But so our voice for peace is very much needed, I think. And also this year is the 7th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice. So we are going to use this period as an opportunity to raise more attention about the Korean War issue. So yeah, we held a press conference to call to resolve the threat of war and build peace in this February, and many religious and civil society representatives participated and reconfirmed our solidarity. And recently, South Korea and the U.S. Army have been conducting large-scale joint military exercises, as Jae-Jung Suh said. They do military exercises much more and more often than they used to. Military tensions on the Korean Peninsula are very high, and these exercises raise the risk of armed conflict. So we have conducted various activities to call for suspension to these exercises and to create conditions for dialogue. Peace marches in Seoul, and many people gathered for the march. And this is the photo of the dying performance in front of the South Korean president office to raise attention about the risk of war. And a few days ago, there was a large-scale US-ROK combined field exercises in Hwang, in Sooyoung exercises, southern part of South Korea. And exercises resumed after a 5-year hiatus and mobilizing more troops and weapons than ever before. This is an aggressive military exercises in which South Korean and US forces landed on the North Korea coast and deployed inland, as Professor Jae-Jung Suh explained. And this kind of exercises includes practicing preemptive strike strategies. So if these military exercises continue, military tensions will continue to rise and the situation will become dangerous. So we went to the field exercise location and conducted the peace action while the exercise was going on. And smoke bombs and very loud noises from fighter jets filled the air. Many people gathered from all over the country, and we shouted to stop the aggressive war exercises and make peace by peaceful means. South Korean civil society organizations have been doing a lot of activities in the face of the recent serious situation. And yeah, so please let me explain more about this year's plan. These are our goals for now. So we will raise public attention about the risk of war on the Korean Peninsula and speak out against the provocative military actions. The second one, we will organize various actions for Korea peace to mark the 7th anniversary of the Armistice. And we will gather 1 million signatures of the Korea peace appeal and submit them to the UN and the government of the two Koreas and US and China. And the last one, increase public awareness of resistance to the expanding ROK-US military alliance and ROK-US-Japan military cooperation. So yeah, I would like to share our main plan. The first one is Korea Peace Appeal signature movement, and we will continue the signature movement in this year. We will focus our effort to gather 1 million signatures in the first half of the year, and we will collect signatures and support from influential figures, and we are going to ask the ROK National Assembly to make a special resolution or statement on the 7 years of Armistice. The second plan is peace actions against growing military tension. We will continue to organize various actions against military exercises and military cooperation. The third one is 27 July is the 7th anniversary of the Armistice. So we are planning to organize global action for Korea peace in 300 places. We are planning to organize peace actions in 200 places in South Korea and 100 places abroad. So we will collect photos and videos of the actions and share them on our map basis website. In June and July. So we hope to see various actions, various activities like taking place around the world. And well, the first one is the Korea Peace Action Week in 22 and from 22 and to 27 July. We will organize peace rally, huge large-scale peace rally and march in Seoul. And we will plan. We are planning to organize international conference in Seoul and through online, and we will gather the opinions from the international peace activists and to create a peace declaration on 7th anniversary of Korean War Armistice. It will include the voices on why the Korean War should end and how peace on the Korean Peninsula is linked to world peace and sustainable world. And we will keep you posted on this international conference plan. And yeah, this is a photo from peace rally near the DMZ last year, and we look forward to being able to bring even more people together than last year in this July peace march. And final plan is submission of the signatures. So we are going to submit the signatures and outcomes of our campaign to the government of these countries and UN Secretary General during the UN General Assembly in September and October, and calling for their action for peace in Korea. And we are planning the peace rally and international conference in New York too. So we hope to share more details with you later. And so please join us. And this is how to join our campaign in your place. So I would like to ask you share our signature campaign widely and in our English website. You can sign as you know, you can sign the appeal through clicking the button below the Korea Peace Appeal sign here. And please collect the signatures. You can hold a strict campaign or place signature seats near your neighborhood and ask people to join the appeal. And you can download various materials on our website like this, and you can also make your own images or your own statement and using our sources. And please share our campaign through your organization's website and channels, and emphasize that this year is 7th anniversary of Korean War, and 70 years is enough. And the second one, please be one of the 300 places to host the Global Action for Korea Peace in June and July. So please develop and share your place's action plan. You can organize any type of actions like the rally, picketing, and forums, and film screening, and religious event, and or send letters to your government. And send us your photos and videos or articles, and we will bring them together to show our one voice for Korea Peace. And we will keep you updated with the details through email and our channels. And please share any writing or materials that you publish or creative for Korea Peace via social media with these hashtags and the Korean War and Korea Peace Appeal. And yeah, or email us, send us through email, and we will bring them everything together. So yeah, our huge plan is only possible with you. So, and I think peace is possible if we want it. So let's build peace together with people power. And as Jae-Jung Suh said, we still have rooms and still have opportunities for diplomacy and dialogue. So I think we can make another way for peace. So yeah, thank you for listening, and we look forward to working together for peace this year. Thank you.